Because they're all really individual films. It's not like in 1988 somebody said, we're going to write 5 stories, act in them over the next 25 years.
I mean, the terrorists, sir, we don't exactly know. We haven't heard a peep from them. That's a wild goose chase over here at Nakatomi Plaza.
It was Christmas Eve, 1988, a Los Angeles skyscraper, and a New York cop who just wanted to talk to his wife. What followed was one of the most influential action films ever made, a film that redefined what the genre could be and turned a television actor into one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. The people who made Die Hard are scattered across nearly 4 decades now. Here is the Die Hard cast. Then and now in 2026, see how many you can still recognize. Bruce Willis, John McClane. John McClane was not supposed to be the hero. He was supposed to be the wrong man in the wrong place. A regular cop, out of his depth, running barefoot through broken glass and improvising his way through a situation that every professional in the building was handling worse than he was. That specific quality of reluctant, wisecracking competence was what Bruce Willis brought to the role, and it made him a film star of the first rank after a decade of being primarily a television personality. Born Walter Bruce Willis in Idar Oberstein, West Germany, on March 19, 1955, to a German mother and an American soldier father, Willis grew up in Penns Grove, New Jersey, after the family relocated when he was 2 years old. He struggled with a stutter as a child, a condition that disappeared, as he later described it, when he was on stage, where the performance context created a focus that bypassed the stammer entirely. That discovery pointed him toward acting as a practical as well as an artistic pursuit. He studied drama at Montclair State University, left without completing his degree, and worked as a bartender in New York while auditioning through the early 1980s. The role that changed his trajectory was David Addison on the ABC series Moonlighting, which premiered in 1985 opposite Sybil Shepherd. His performance, fast-talking, physically energetic, alternating between comedy and genuine emotion with an ease that the show's writers quickly adapted their scripts to accommodate, made him a television star before film had found him. Die Hard in 1988 was not an obviously safe bet. The role had been offered to several major stars: Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Burt Reynolds, and others had passed on it before Willis was cast at a salary of $5 million, which was considered substantial for the time and generated press skepticism about whether a television actor could carry a major action film. He answered that question in the first 30 minutes and kept answering it across the film's 2-hour runtime. The films that followed, Die Hard 2 in 1990, The Last Boy Scout in 1991, Pulp Fiction in 1994, 12 Monkeys in 1995, The Fifth Element in 1997, The Sixth Sense in 1999, built one of the most commercially durable careers in Hollywood. 4 more Die Hard films followed between 1995 and 2013, each diminishing in quality while maintaining sufficient audience affection for the character to sustain the franchise. In March 2022, Willis's family announced that he had been diagnosed with aphasia, a condition affecting his ability to communicate, and that he was stepping back from acting. In February 2023, a further announcement confirmed a diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia, a progressive neurological condition. He has not appeared publicly in a professional capacity since. Bruce Willis is 70 years old in 2026. Alan Rickman, Hans Gruber. Hans Gruber was the villain by whom all subsequent action film villains have been measured, not because he was the most physically threatening, but because he was the most intelligent, the best dressed, and the only person in Nakatomi Plaza who seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself throughout the entire situation. Alan Rickman played him in his first American film role, and the performance arrived fully formed, without a single wasted gesture or a single line that didn't land exactly where he intended. Born Alan Sidney Patrick Rickman in Hammersmith, London, on February 21, 1946, Rickman had spent 2 decades building a stage career of considerable distinction before Die Hard brought him to film. He trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and worked at the Royal Shakespeare Company through the 1970s and early 1980s, building a reputation in British theater as a performer of exceptional technical precision and a particular gift for characters who operated at a slightly different temperature from everyone else in the room. His performance as the Vicomte de Valmont in Christopher Hampton's play Les Liaisons Dangereuses on Broadway in 1987, a role of calculated seduction and cold intelligence, was what brought him to the attention of Die Hard's producers. The qualities Valmont required and the qualities Hans Gruber required were not identical, but they occupied the same register of controlled menace and absolute self-possession, and Rickman brought both with a completeness that the film's success owes a significant debt to. The fall from the Nakatomi Plaza rooftop, filmed with Rickman genuinely startled by being dropped a split second earlier than he had been told, capturing an involuntary expression of surprise that became one of the most discussed single frames in the film, is one of those behind-the-scenes stories that people tell because the technique and the result illuminate each other perfectly. His subsequent career included Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in 1991, Sense and Sensibility in 1995, Dogma in 1999, Love Actually in 2003, and, across 8 films from 2001 to 2011, the role of Professor Severus Snape in the Harry Potter series, which introduced him to a generation of audiences who had not been born when Die Hard was released and who will likely remember him primarily in those robes, rather than that suit. He directed The Winter Guest in 1997 and A Little Chaos in 2014, demonstrating an interest in directing that his acting career had not left him much time to pursue. Alan Rickman died on January 14, 2016, in London at the age of 69 from pancreatic cancer. He had been diagnosed in 2015 and had continued working throughout his illness without public disclosure of his condition. His death came as a genuine shock to the film community, which had not known he was ill. Bonnie Bedelia, Holly Gennaro McClane. Holly Gennaro McClane was the reason John was at Nakatomi Plaza in the first place. His estranged wife, executive at the Nakatomi Corporation, the woman whose professional success had relocated the marriage to Los Angeles while John stayed in New York, and the marriage came apart quietly in the space between them. Bonnie Bedelia played her with a specificity that made Holly feel like a real person navigating a real situation, and the film is considerably more grounded because of it. The scene in which she and John finally talk on the roof before the ending gives the film its emotional weight. 2 people who have been fighting the same fight from different positions, realizing they are still on the same side. Born Bonnie Bedelia Culkin in New York City on March 25, 1948, she is the aunt of actor Macaulay Culkin, a fact that tends to surface in any profile written about her, and that she has addressed with the patience of someone who has been answering the same question for decades. Bedelia studied acting in New York and built a stage and television career through the 1960s and 1970s before transitioning to film. Her early work included They Shoot Horses, Don't They? In 1969, in which she played a Depression-era marathon dancer with a physical and emotional commitment that the film's brutal premise required. Heart Like a Wheel. In 1983, a film about drag racing champion Shirley Muldowney earned her a Golden Globe nomination and the kind of critical attention that should have made her a larger star than the industry subsequently treated her as. Her casting in Die Hard was the result of director John McTiernan wanting a Holly who was clearly competent enough that John's initial resentment of her success was understandable, and Bedelia brought exactly that quality. Someone whose professional authority on screen made the marriage's failure feel like a real thing, rather than a plot convenience. Her work in Die Hard 2 in 1990 reprised the Holly role in a film of considerably lesser quality, and she stepped back from major film work in the following years in favor of television, where her work was consistent and sustained. Her 6-season run on Parenthood as Camille Braverman, the grandmother of a large, chaotic California family, introduced her to an audience for whom Die Hard was a film they had heard about rather than seen in its original run, and demonstrated that her dramatic instincts had not diminished across the intervening decades. Bonnie Bedelia is 78 years old in 2026. Reginald Vell Johnson, Sergeant Al Powell. Al Powell was the officer on the other end of the radio, the desk-bound cop in the parking lot who became John McClane's only genuine ally through the entire film, the voice that kept him connected to the world outside the building and to the possibility that any of it was going to be all right. Reginald Vell Johnson played him with a warmth and a specific quality of decency that grounded the film's most emotionally available performance. The moment late in the film when Powell finally draws his weapon after years of desk work, the backstory established economically in a few lines of dialogue, is one of the most earned payoffs in the action genre. Born Reginald Vell Johnson in Queens, New York, on August 16, 1952, Vell Johnson had worked in theater and television through the 1970s and early 1980s before Die Hard arrived. He had appeared in Ghostbusters in 1984, the film in which William Atherton, his Die Hard castmate, also appeared, and in Armed and Dangerous in 1986, building the kind of career that consisted of strong work in supporting roles without a starring vehicle to anchor public recognition. His physical presence, large, reassuring, projecting the specific quality of someone you would trust with information and with your safety, made him a natural fit for authority figures, which the industry deployed consistently across his career. The warmth that made Al Powell work was the same warmth that made Carl Winslow work, and the through line between the two characters is visible once you have seen both. Die Hard led directly to Die Hard 2 in 1990, where Al Powell appeared again, and the radio-based dynamic between him and McClane was reprised in a film that used the formula of the original with less of its original precision. The role that defined his public recognition for the largest audience came through Family Matters, the ABC sitcom that ran from 1989 to 1998, where Vell Johnson played Carl Winslow, a Chicago police officer, husband, and father, across all 9 seasons of a show that began as a spin-off of Perfect Strangers and became one of the most reliably watched family comedies of its decade. The character of Steve Urkel, introduced in the first season as a minor supporting role and rapidly elevated to co-lead status based on audience response, gave Vell Johnson's Carl Winslow a comedic foil that the show used consistently for the remainder of its run. Reginald Vell Johnson is 73 years old in 2026. Alexander Godunov, Carl. Carl was Hans Gruber's most dangerous lieutenant, the one whose personal stake in what happened at Nakatomi Plaza exceeded his professional obligations, because McClane killed his brother in the early stages of the film, and Carl spent the rest of it pursuing a vendetta alongside the actual job. Alexander Godunov played him with a physical menace and a cold fury that made him genuinely threatening in a film full of people trying to seem threatening. Born Alexander Viktorovich Godunov in Sakhalin, Russia, on November 28, 1949, Godunov was a principal dancer with the Bolshoi Ballet, one of the finest male dancers of his generation, when he defected to the United States in August 1979, while the Bolshoi was on a tour in New York. His defection became an international incident when his wife, Ludmila Vlasova, who had not defected and wanted to return to the Soviet Union, was held on the Aeroflot plane at JFK Airport for 3 days, while American and Soviet officials negotiated. The standoff, reported globally, watched by both governments, ended with Vlasova's departure. The marriage effectively ended with it. Godunov joined the American Ballet Theater after his defection and danced with ABT until 1982, when injuries reduced his ability to continue at the level his career had required. He transitioned to acting, appearing in Witness in 1985 alongside Harrison Ford, which gave him his first significant film role, and then in Die Hard 3 years later. His career in Hollywood after Die Hard was intermittent. The transition from elite dancer to film actor was one the industry accommodated unevenly. His physical presence was undeniable, his face was striking, but the specific kinds of roles available to him were limited by the same typecasting that affects any performer whose first major film role is as a menacing antagonist. He appeared in The Money Pit in 1986 alongside Tom Hanks and Shelley Long, which had been filmed before Die Hard but released first. He took roles in European co-productions and worked in television through the late 1980s and into the early 1990s. He struggled with alcoholism in his later years, a condition that his friends and colleagues noted had developed in the decade following his defection. During the period of professional transition and personal isolation that accompanied his departure from the Bolshoi and from the world he had known, Alexander Godunov died on May 18, 1995 in West Hollywood, California, at the age of 45, from complications related to alcoholism. His body was found in his apartment. He had been one of the finest dancers of his generation, and, in Hans Gruber's inner circle, one of the most effective physical presences of the 1980s action film. Paul Gleason, Deputy Police Chief Dwayne T. Robinson. Dwayne T. Robinson was the man making decisions from outside the building who was consistently, reliably wrong about every decision he made. The bureaucratic authority figure, whose confidence was precisely inversely proportional to his competence. Paul Gleason played him with a comic pomposity that the film used as both comic relief and as a structural device for demonstrating how isolated and alone John McClane actually was inside Nakatomi Plaza. Every time Robinson overrode a better suggestion from someone with more information, the film reminded the audience that McClane was operating without institutional support of any value. Born Paul Gleason in Jersey City, New Jersey, on May 4, 1939, Gleason had built a career in television and film through the 1970s and early 1980s that specialized in exactly this type: the self-important authority figure, the antagonist whose power exceeded his judgment, the man who would rather be wrong with confidence than right with humility. He had appeared in Trading Places in 1983 and in television series across the decade before the role that preceded Die Hard, and remains the thing most people know him for. Richard Vernon, the assistant principal in John Hughes's The Breakfast Club in 1985, was Gleason's defining performance, a film that made him one of the most recognizable faces of 1980s American cinema to an entire generation of high school students who found in Vernon's combination of pettiness and institutional self-importance a perfectly calibrated portrait of adult authority at its most stifling. The line he delivers about each of the Breakfast Club members becoming exactly the kind of adult they fear, followed by his own demonstration of having become exactly the kind of adult they fear, is one of those moments where the film's structure and an actor's precise delivery produce something that lands harder than any of its individual parts. Together, Vernon and Robinson established Gleason as the go-to performer for a particular kind of antagonistic authority, a niche he occupied with remarkable precision across both films. His television career continued through the 1990s and into the 2000s. He was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma, a form of cancer associated with asbestos exposure, in his final years. Paul Gleason died on May 27, 2006 in Santa Monica, California, at the age of 67. Hart Bochner, Harry Ellis. Harry Ellis was the character the audience was invited to dislike from his first scene. The slick, self-congratulatory Nakatomi executive who was Holly's colleague and whose attempt to negotiate directly with Hans Gruber demonstrated a confidence in his own persuasive abilities that the situation did not justify and that Hans rewarded with the specific indifference of a man who has already decided what is going to happen. Hart Bochner played him with a specific kind of oily charm, the permanent grin of someone who has been rewarded for charm often enough to mistake it for a universal key. That made every scene he was in more entertaining than it had any right to be. Born Hart Bochner in Toronto, Ontario on October 3, 1956, he is the son of Lloyd Bochner, the Canadian actor who built a long career in Hollywood and Canadian film and television. Growing up in the industry through his father's career gave Hart Bochner an early understanding of how the business worked and access to training and connections that independent paths to the industry rarely provide. He studied at the University of California, San Diego and worked in film and television through the late 1970s and 1980s. Breaking away in 1979, Peter Yates's affectionate cycling film set in Indiana that became a modest critical and commercial success gave him one of his earlier significant roles. Supergirl in 1984 cast him as a college instructor whose romantic complications become entangled with superhero intervention. Die Hard gave him what remains his most recognizable role. Harry Ellis's attempt to talk his way out of a crisis that required something completely other than talking received its definitive response from Hans Gruber, and the scene is one of the film's most sharply written and most precisely performed. The specific rhythm of Ellis's pitch, the increasing desperation beneath the maintained bravado, the dawning awareness that Gruber is not impressed, required an actor who could hold all of that simultaneously without letting the seams show. After Die Hard, Bochner moved into directing and producing alongside his acting work. He wrote and directed PCU in 1994, a college comedy starring Jeremy Piven, and has worked as a producer on various projects through the following decades. He has continued acting in film and television internationally, working in British and Canadian productions as well as American ones. Hart Bochner is 69 years old in 2026 and remains active in the industry on both sides of the camera. Devorah White, Argyle. Argyle was the limousine driver who brought John McClane to Nakatomi Plaza from the airport and then spent the entire film waiting in the parking garage, listening to music, discovering the telephone line, and eventually contributing to the resolution of the crisis by running his car into the getaway vehicle at exactly the right moment. Devorah White played him with an easy charm and a physical looseness that made every scene in the parking garage more enjoyable than the premise suggested it should be. A one-man subplot that gave the film a secondary rhythm underneath the main event upstairs. Born Devorah White in 1961, he had limited prior film and television credits before Die Hard. His role as Argyle was his most significant film appearance, and the parking garage scenes, which could easily have been purely functional connective tissue in the screenplay, benefited from his ability to make Argyle feel like a person with a full life and a complete personality that existed before and after the events of Christmas Eve. The scene in which he discovers the phone line, puts on his headset, and processes what he is hearing while simultaneously dancing is a small, self-contained piece of physical comedy that the film needed someone with genuine instinct for timing to pull off. Devorah White worked in film and television through the 1990s and 2000s in supporting roles, and has made appearances at Die Hard retrospective events over the years, consistently expressing affection for the production and the experience of working on it. James Shigeta, Joseph Takagi. Joseph Takagi was the Nakatomi Corporation's president, the man Hans Gruber needed the vault combination from, the man who refused to provide it. The man Hans shot without hesitation in the film's first act to establish that the situation was entirely real and that the rules everyone else was operating under did not apply. James Shigeta played him with a quiet dignity in limited screen time that made the loss of the character register despite its speed. Born James Shigeta in Honolulu, Hawaii, on June 17, 1929, Shigeta had been one of the first Asian American actors to achieve leading man status in Hollywood films, a fact that requires some context to fully appreciate, given the industry's history of casting Asian American performers in subordinate or stereotyped roles throughout the studio era. His appearance in The Crimson Kimono in 1959, directed by Samuel Fuller, cast him as a Los Angeles detective investigating a murder in Little Tokyo, a starring role, a romantic lead, a man of complexity and dignity, at a time when such casting was genuinely unusual. Walk Like a Dragon in 1960 and Flower Drum Song in 1961, the Rodgers and Hammerstein musical adaptation, furthered a film career that consistently sought and found roles of substance. The industry's structural limitations for Asian American performers in the 1960s and 1970s meant that his film career became less prominent as the decade advanced, and he worked primarily in television through those years, appearing in Hawaii Five-0, Kung Fu, MASH, and dozens of other series that kept him working and visible without restoring the leading man profile of his early films. His die-hard role came in the later years of a career that had been built over 3 decades, and it brought him to a new generation of audiences. James Shigeta died on July 28, 2014, in Los Angeles, California, at the age of 85. William Atherton, Richard Thornburg. Richard Thornburg was the television reporter who made everything worse, the journalist who broadcast Holly's identity on live television, compromising her safety and nearly getting her killed in service of a story that he was entirely willing to damage people to get. William Atherton played him as a specific and recognizable type, the ambitious media personality whose ethical flexibility is matched only by his confidence that he is on the right side of every situation he creates. Born William Robert Atherton Knight in Orange, Connecticut on July 30th, 1947, Atherton studied at the Pasadena Playhouse and at the Carnegie Mellon School of Drama before building a career in theater and film through the 1970s. He appeared in The Sugarland Express in 1974, Steven Spielberg's debut theatrical feature, in which he played a young father whose desperate attempt to recover his infant son from the welfare system leads to an escalating disaster across the Texas highway system. The film gave him early access to a major director and a dramatic role of real weight, and his performance demonstrated a capacity for complex, sympathetic characters that his subsequent career did not always utilize. The Day of the Locust in 1975, John Schlesinger's adaptation of Nathaniel West's Hollywood novel, gave him another substantial role in a film of serious ambition. His transition from dramatic leads to antagonistic supporting roles happened gradually through the early 1980s and produced the work he is best known for. Walter Peck in Ghostbusters in 1984, the EPA inspector whose decision to shut down the containment unit released every ghost in New York City, was the performance that established his public identity as the antagonistic authority figure par excellence. And together with Richard Thornburg in Die Hard, it created a double portrait of institutional officialdom at its most damaging. Both characters are convinced of their own righteousness while being comprehensively wrong about the situation they are operating in, and Atherton delivered both with a precision and a specific quality of self-righteousness that audiences found genuinely infuriating, which is, professionally speaking, exactly what the roles required. He reprised Richard Thornburg in Die Hard 2 in 1990, where the character's capacity for making things worse in service of a story was given expanded screen time and applied to a new set of circumstances with the same results. His subsequent career has continued across film and television. He appeared in Biodome in 1996, in various television productions through the 2000s and 2010s, and has maintained a working presence in the industry for 5 decades. William Atherton is 78 years old in 2026. Die Hard was made in the summer of 1988 on location at the Fox Plaza building in Century City and on sets constructed at 20th Century Fox, with a production that by all accounts was a genuine collaborative effort between a director, John McTiernan, who understood exactly what kind of film he was making, and a cast that included one actor about to become a major star and several others who had been working at the highest level of their profession for years. The people who made it are scattered across nearly 4 decades now. Rickman is gone, dead at 69 in 2016 from pancreatic cancer. Godunov is gone, dead at 45 in 1995. Gleason is gone, dead at 67 in 2006. Shigeta is gone, dead at 85 in 2014. Willis is still alive at 70, but no longer working, managing a diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia that ended his career in 2022. Bedelia, Vel Johnson, Bolkner, Atherton, and White are still here, in their late 60s and 70s, at various distances from the Nakatomi Plaza of 38 years ago. The film itself has not aged. It is still exactly the film it was in July 1988 when it opened. Still the clearest possible demonstration of what an action movie can be when everything is working at once. If this kind of film history is what brings you here, hit that like button and subscribe. There is a lot more coming.